say the game is getting old. Monday morning and your coffee's cold. Life is not what you want it to be. You need another chance to...
Hello, everyone, and welcome to A New Direction. My name is Jay Izzo, and wow, do we have a great show. I'm going to tell you something. This is going to be one of those eye-opening shows that is going to absolutely just go, you're going to go, what? No, Jay, I don't. No, see, you're going to do the denial thing. I promise you will, because you know why? I am with author expert. His name is Howard J. Ross. The book is entitled Everyday Bias. You know what? We're in denial when it comes to bias, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, and I was talking to Howard, and I was saying that, I have this acronym for denial. Don't even know I am lying. And when it comes to bias, we don't even know we are lying. You know why? Because we don't think we're biased. We think we're right. We think that we have got the world by the hand, and we're, you know what? We are completely honest and truthful. There is no bias in us whatsoever. There is nothing about us that could possibly be biased, because you know why? We see things the right way. That's a bias. People, we're all biased. Come on. I don't care where you live in this great world that we have, right? You're biased. You have a set of beliefs. You have a set of, you've got a set of memories. Howard's going to talk about all that, okay? And I'm just going to tell you something. He's brilliant. The book's brilliant. The book is absolutely fantastic. It's an eye-opener. I'm telling you. It made me look at myself really clearly about my own biases, right? And I always knew that I had them, but then I had to be really honest about them, because the truth of the matter is I still hold on to them. And it may not be that you even see them, but I know I have them. What do we do with them? How do we overcome them? That's why we have Howard Ross on the show. He's going to help us do that, all right? Hey, but before we do that, right, let's do what we do every week, right? And I talk to you about your training, right? Because I believe we're four-part people. We're physical people, we're mental people, we're emotional people, and we're spiritual people. And the truth of the matter is, I've interviewed a lot of these Special Operation Forces guys on the show, and every one of them has said the same thing, right? And, when you're exhausted, when you're tired, when you're under stress, when you're under pressure, when things are going bad, at the end of the day, you're only as good as your training in those four areas. That's it. Because that's what you rely on when you're exhausted, is your training. And what's interesting? I started thinking about this the other day, is, if you're not training every day, then you can't possibly be better. And you go, Jay, I can't physically train every day. Well, I didn't say intensity of training, but you need to be doing something, right, every day, right? I mean, you could be stretching. You could be doing a whole variety of things that you could be doing with your mind and your body and your spirit and your emotions, that you could be training all those things every day, right? We should be intentional about that, right? So let's just go through these four areas, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being miserable, 10 being outstanding. Let's talk about your physical training and how that's going, right? So when I say physical, here's what I mean. I'm not just talking about exercise. I'm talking about getting enough sleep. I'm talking about drinking enough water, right? I'm talking about eating right? I'm talking about doing the things that you need, stretching more, doing the things that you need to do to take care of your body, right? By the way, I'm going to tell you something about training in the physical sense here right now too, and it can apply to any sense. Can I tell you something? If you're physically training and then you're going out and you decide to eat, sugar and candy and drink sodas, and you're going to overdrink or overconsume alcohol, can I just tell you something? You just cut back your training, right? See, we think that because I train, that allows me to eat something that is not good for me. That's not the best your training can do. All right, so you need to be really careful about, not making excuses saying, you know what, I get to eat what I want to eat because I worked out hard. That's not training, right? That means that you're trying to get something, and we can be real biased about that. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself in your training, right? 1 being bad, 10 being great, 5 is the average. All right, there's your first number. Second number, mental training. By the way, great mental training. It's called reading. I know it comes as a shock, doesn't it? But you know what? You need to be active in your mental training. You need to be able to you need to take some activity in training yourself mentally. You need to read. You need to expand your mind. You need to grow. We have two sides of the brain. There's a right side that's creative. The left side is more logical. We need to be working both halves of the brain. right? And when we need to be constantly vigilant about working, not just letting things come at us, not just believing everything that we hear, not just allowing things to just be self-absorbed. No, we have to take an active part. It's like doing the physical training. You can't just go to the gym and expect to get better. You actually have to lift the weights. You actually have to do some work if you want to train, and that's true mentally. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say your mental training is going, right? Okay, emotional training. And you go, how do you emotionally train? We emotionally train every day. I promise you somebody has done something to you, whether cut you off in the middle of the road, or somebody has nagged at you, or somebody just sent you an email that was just mean-spirited. How did you respond emotionally? Yeah, I asked that question. How did you respond emotionally? Because you had a choice, right? See, that's the thing, is that you actually had a choice. You could choose. You could choose how you respond emotionally. It didn't say this was easy. It takes practice, right? All training is practice, right? Emotional training is just like the gym. You can't just go to the gym one day and expect to be in great shape. You have to do it every day. Emotional training, same way, every day. You have to be intentional. You have to work on your technique. You have to say, whoa, why am I feeling this? Do I need to feel this? I don't need to feel this. I got a choice here, right? So how would you say you're doing in your emotional training? All right, then finally, you've got 3 numbers, right? Mental, physical, emotional. Now finally is the spiritual number, right? How's your spiritual training going? And what I mean by spiritual training, I was reading something the other day, and then I was kind of commenting to myself about it. You know, so often we try to think about spirituality in terms of happiness. But sadly, happiness is subjective to each one of us. So there's no central unifying force when it comes to happy. However, joy is something internal, meaning that regardless of our circumstances, regardless of anything that's happening around us, that we can always experience joy inside of ourselves. Right? Now, how you experience that and how you bring that in, right? A lot of people have different theories and philosophies about that, right? Some people believe in God, some people believe in meditation, some people believe in nature. There's a whole variety of ways that people believe that they can experience that joy, that sense of self-centeredness. And I don't mean self-centered as an egotistical, I mean to be centered into the self so that you can be relaxed and calm in the midst of chaos. That's the spiritual part. So what are you doing and how's that working for you? And you say, I'm not spiritual. I promise you, you are. I say it every week. And you know what that is, right? Do you have plans for the future? Yes or no? And all of you are going to go, yes, I do have plans for the future. I plan on going somewhere, right? Have you gone there yet? No, well, because they're a plan, right? So that means you have faith that they're going to happen. And if you have faith that they're going to happen, that means you're spiritual. There it is. So how's it working? And if it's not working, what do you got to do to change it? You know, and that's the question you need to ask all 4 of these areas, right? You know what? If it's not working, what do you need to do to change? So you got 4 numbers: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, right? Whatever those numbers are, we're just trying to get to the next number. I'm not trying to get you. If you said you are honestly a 3, I'm not trying to get you to a 10 today. I just want you to do the best you can to get to a 4, or even a 3.5. Do something to change that number so that, you know what, tomorrow you are just a little bit higher than the number you're right now in your training, right? And speaking of someone who is just brilliant, and he's a guy who trains all the time. His name is Howard J. Roth. He's a lifelong social justice advocate and a seminal thought leader on identifying and addressing unconscious bias. He is author of Reinventing Diversity and the Washington bestseller, which we have here, Everyday Bias. He has won the 2019 Aldous Book Award Gold Medal for Social Change and Social Justice. He has specialized in synthesis of neurocognitive and social science research. By the way, that's much easier to read than to say. And and direct application. His client work is focused on the areas of corporate culture change, leadership development, and managing diversity. Howard has successfully implemented change efforts in academic institutions, corporations, and retail, healthcare, media, governmental institutions in 47 states and over 40 countries worldwide. He's also delivered programs at Harvard, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, Wharton, and over 25 other colleges and universities. Howard served as the 2007-2008 Janetta B. Cole Professor of Diversity at Bennett College for Women, the first time a white man had ever served in such a position, which we have in common because I taught culture and diversity as well to a majority minority audience. And so I am really excited to have him on. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show and welcome to A New Direction, Howard Roth. Welcome, Howard.
Jay, thanks so much for being here. Man, you were on a roll. You could just keep going. I mean, it's like, I do appreciate the warm introduction. My father would have loved it. My mother would have even believed a lot of it. So thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. With this book that you wrote, Everyday Bias, and by the way, secondary title, Identifying and Navigating Unconscious Judgments in Our Daily Lives. I found the book to be fascinating, just fascinating and interesting to read. I loved reading through it because I was, as somebody who's a psychological professional, I was so engaged into the idea of bias because I know that we have it. And I had Dr. Gleb Taberski, who wrote Never Go With Your Gut, who talked about bias as well. And
Gleb's a good friend.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, he is a good friend. I know him well.
Okay, well, he did show here last year and was great, and we had a great time. And when I saw the book, I said, you know what, I think this is going to be just a great follow-up to Gleb's work. So I'm very excited about it. You come right out in the introduction, and I thought it was kind of interesting. You know, you really kind of soften us up, right? People buy more French wine when French music is playing on the radio or in the store, right. And they buy more German wine when German music is playing on the background. And you say biases occur without people even know why they occur. Human beings are constantly, routinely, and profoundly biased. We never know why we're biased. So where are we? I mean, we don't know why we're biased, but yet you say we're biased.
Yes. Well, let's just start with first of all kidding aside, thanks so much for having me, Jay.
Sure.
And I really appreciate being here. I apologize if you're catching a little bit of a dog in the background. That's my puppy downstairs. My wife, I'm sure, will get him out of the house quickly. But this is one of the problems with the Zoom environment. You know, we're operating from our homes. So I do hope that everybody's really well today. And also want to just recognize that today is National Indigenous Peoples Day. And I'm on the land previously inhabited by the Choctaw people where I am outside of Winchester, Virginia. So, I think let me take it out of the domain that we normally think of bias and put it into the function of how our mind works. You know, you wake up in the morning, you get out of bed, you walk across your bedroom floor to the restroom and do what you need to do. You never stop to think for a minute, is this floor going to hold me? You never, with each step, it's conceivably possible that a floorboard could break, you could fall through the ground and something could happen. That's all conceivably possible. It has happened in human history, but we don't think about it because our life experience has taught us floors we can trust. And so we walk across the floor without thinking about it. Or people have a circumstance where they, you eat a food and you have a negative reaction to that food. And so from now on, whenever you see that food, you see it in a different way. This is fundamentally the way the mind works. You know, we learn from the past to predict the future. And if we didn't do that, life would grind to a slow halt. In fact, we almost couldn't move forward. In fact, my good friend Sukhvinder Obi, who's a brain scientist at McMaster University in Canada, likes to say that our brains are designed to be good enough most of the time. We're making this guesswork. So what we've discovered in terms of the research on bias is we do this with people all the time. You know, you meet somebody, you have a reaction to him, hey, you see him, you have kind of a positive hit. He seems like a good guy. Or you meet somebody else, there's something about this person is turning me off. Something about this person is making me wary. And often we don't even know what that is. It's just sort of a feeling that comes associated with the fact that that person clearly is reminding us of somebody else. So that's at the heart of what we're really talking about here, is this fundamental human dynamic, which is predicting the present and the future based on our past experience, and it shows up as bias.
So I think a lot of people want to believe, you say on page 3 of the book, by the way, we're only on page 3, we are constantly making decisions that are influenced by unconscious biases. In fact, even when our biases seem conscious, they may be influenced by a pattern of unconscious assumptions that we have absorbed throughout our life. And then you give this great analogy. It's like a polluted river. Mm-hmm. Talk us through that, because I think, because you and I both know that we really are in denial. We don't. I think there's several different types of people, right? We're either in denial that we have a bias, or we don't think that the bias that we have really is a bias.
Yes.
Does that make sense? What I just said?
Well, this is the way the mind justifies. Yeah, absolutely, Jay. This is the way the mind justifies. And one of the things that I think, when I was writing the book and subsequently, and when I work with people around this work, one of the things I try to do is to demystify and to remove the demonization of bias.
Right.
Not because bias is harmless. It could be obviously extremely harmful, as we've seen in tragic cases in the news where somebody, police officer, without intending harm, without having any decidedly racial motivation or anything else, pulls and shoots somebody who's innocent because they represent a caricature of a stereotype that they may have seen before that looks dangerous, something like
Right.
that. But the other side of it is bias can also protect us from danger. If you see somebody who is destined to do you harm, and you avoid them. You don't go down that dark alley when you hear bottles crashing and people yelling and making loud noises, or you see somebody coming towards you with a glowering look and fists made, and to prepare yourself for that. And so bias can both be positive and negative, but the bottom line is it's always being developed. And so when you talk about this notion of the polluted river, I mean, we're living our lives and stuff gets thrown in over time that shapes the way we see certain people or another. And obviously, we're going to more likely make determinations on people who are different from us, because people who are the same as us, if you think like I'm white skinned, obviously, for those of us those are watching and not just listening, when somebody talks about white people, I have a whole family and a whole clan of people in my life, in addition to my friends of color, but all of these people. And so you talk about one white person, I don't necessarily think it means all white people, because I've known so many different kinds of white people over the course of my life. But if I've known relatively few Asians, or relatively few African Americans, or relatively few Latinx people, or other groups of people who are different from me, it's much easier for me to generalize. It's much easier for me to take that few and make it more, because I don't know quite so many. And so it's often true that we have stronger biases against people who are outside of our group than we do about people who are inside of our group. But we develop these attitudes and this way of being. We develop attitudes about people based on their body shape and size. One of the places, as you know, that we talk about in the book, were biases that even physicians have about people who are overweight. Five major universities have done studies that found that physicians have biases about people who are overweight, spend less time with them, follow up less on protocols, don't take what they're saying as seriously. And ironically, patients have been found to have biases about physicians who are overweight. So this is constantly like a drip, drip, drip that's in our system all the time. And sometimes one of the reasons I titled the book Everyday Bias was because I don't want to get into splitting hairs between what becomes conscious and what's unconscious, because we never really know. But for example, many of our conscious biases, I'll use homophobia as an example. People have biases against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. That may be a conscious bias, but where did it come from? It started when we were little and we were told girls do this, but boys don't do this. Or maybe we were at a religious institution and we heard the priest or the whoever was leading the service say something about people like that. Or we saw some caricatures on TV, and after a while, we develop a negative bias towards those people without even questioning it. And at some point, we have the justification for it, but we've never really questioned that justification. And if anything, my intention with the book is to call people to remove some of our exclamation points and turn them into question marks.
We're talking with Howard J. Ross. He's the author of Everyday Bias, the book that I'm holding up right now, available Amazon bookstores near you. It's a great book. It's available in all sorts of formats. So if you're somebody who would prefer another format outside the hardcover that I'm holding, trust me, it is available as well. I want to jump a little bit further, not too much further. Don't worry, I haven't got too many pages ahead.
It's okay.
But the question you ask, and by the way, I think I'm still in chapter 1, is how rational are we, is the question that you ask. And I thought it's a great question, because I think we so often want to believe we're just so rational, right? And we want to believe, and you talk about this, Cahan, Peters, Dawson, and Slavic, and you talked about how, we think that if we use logic, we can talk someone out of their point of view. And it's really not true, is it?
No, it's not. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite quotes is from John Kenneth Galbraith, the great economist, who once said, most human beings, given a strongly held point of view and evidence to the contrary, will quickly go about refuting the evidence. The research you're talking about, what they found was they took relatively similar mathematical challenges, like, does the facts around gun control or the facts around climate change or the facts around these, and they gave them to people based on their different political orientation. And what they found was that when people were given facts, even though they were the same basic math, when they were given those facts, when it was outside of their normal political orientation. So let's say I'm against gun control, and you give me facts that prove why gun control is right. I lose my ability to count. I literally lose my ability to do the mathematics associated with that, because the brain is sending me signals saying no. It's almost like a silent, like remember the old Walt Disney cartoons with Jiminy Cricket on the shoulder.
Sure.
It's almost like, no, don't do that math right, because if you do, it'll disprove your point, and vice versa, that we somehow make that math work when it fits our political orientation. And God knows we all see this right now in this whichever side of this bifurcated political environment we're in right now. We can all watch the same exact news reporting, completely different interpretations. And so this is really important for us to understand that we think that we're rational beings predominantly, and this goes all the way back to Plato 2,500 years ago, in his Phaedrus dialogues, when he told us that the rational mind was like a charioteer who holds the raging emotions in place, being the horses. And so for 2,500 years, we worshipped at the altar of the rational. And you can hear it in our language. You sure you're being rational about that? You sure you're not being too emotional? Yeah. But in fact, when we now use things like functional magnetic resonating imagery to observe the brain in action, we can see that the emotional parts of our brain, the limbic system, get triggered almost always before the rational part. And What we actually do is we start with that emotional hit, and then we gather the evidence to justify that. So if, for example, you meet me for the first time, Jay, and you're struck by, a positive vibe, then you will start to notice the things about me that align with that positivity.
Right.
You will rationalize the ones that don't. Similarly, if you have a negative vibe, you will, push aside the positives, and you'll start looking for what it is that you don't like. And this is something that human beings do. All of us as human beings do.
His name is Howard J. Ross, and you're listening to him here on A New Direction. Hey, everyone, listen, you know what? New Direction has two fabulous sponsors. One is Epic Physical Therapy. And, a lot of times people think of physical therapy. They think of, having to go because you had injury or surgery, or maybe, because you're some high-level athlete. But, Epic Physical Therapy, while they do serve those people, you know what? They also serve people who are just wanting to move and feel a little bit better. I have been there. I have seen them actually just do training, like personal training, just helping people to physically be more fit, be better, talk about diet, talk about all sorts of things. It really is a complete program. It is why they are the elite team when it comes to physical therapy, because they customize a treatment plan tailored to your individual needs, whatever that may be. So with their experience of rehabbing young athletes to the elite professional athletes, right, they really understand the need to treat the entire body as a functional whole, not just your symptoms or your injury. They get it, right? So when you're ready for your epic relief, your epic recovery, and your epic results, don't look any further. Go to Epic Physical Therapy. You can learn more by going to epicpt.com. That's EPICPT.com. And Linda Craft and Team Realtors, you know what? They've been around for 35 years. And been at the top of the game. How do you stay around in the real estate game for 35 years, be unaffiliated with any national company, and be at the top of your game? Well, I'll tell you how they do it. Linda believed from 1985 when she started the business, she believed in creating relationships, and that was the way the business was going to be done. It was about people, right? Everybody was focused on, at that time in the 80s where interest rates were 18%. She understood that the power of the relationship was far more powerful. And so she created relationships one at a time. Do you know the first customer she had back in 1985 still sees her today? Yeah, they do. Why? Because not only did she believe in creating the relationship, but she believed in maintaining the relationship. And that's why her clients call her and her team the legends of customer service. So no matter where you're at in the world, look, they can help you. I promise you they can, because they've created relationships with the best experts, regardless of company, everywhere in the world. So when you're ready to sell your home or buy your next home, go with the relationship leaders, go with the relationship maintainers, go with the legends, go with Linda Craft and Team Realtors. And you can learn more by going to lindacraft.com. That's LINDACRAFT.com. And we're back here on A New Direction with Howard J. Ross and his outstanding book called Everyday Bias, Identifying Navigating Unconscious Judgments in Our Daily Lives. And by the way, it's an eye-opening book into our brain and how we operate. And we are still at the very beginning. I promise we will move a little bit quicker for it, but I don't want to get us too far because we're talking about how rational we are. And Howard, one of the things I love what the Damasio research, the Descartes error, and he talked about, and this, I want people to understand why we are so confident in knowing that we're just not as rational. And so he talked about his patient Elliot, who had a brain tumor. And I don't want to get, folks, I don't want to get too geeky, but I'm all geeked out because I love ventromedial frontal lobe damage. Okay, so I just love that stuff, right? But let's talk about why that's really an important piece of research. What really happened there, because it really does give us some insight into our lack of rationality.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, basically, what he found in terms of the VMF was that what you're talking about was that this guy Elliot was a very successful businessman, happy family man, life worked completely, had this tumor which impacted that part of his brain, and he came in to interview with Damasio, and Damasio said that, he said, in fact, I was with him once and actually talked to him about this. He said, the guy came in, I figured, wow, if he got emotion out of the picture, because that's a part of the brain that sources emotion, it's kind of located right here between our eyes, basically. He said, figured if you get emotion out of the way, he'd probably make really good decisions because there'd be nothing but, draw the line in the middle, facts on the right, facts on the left, which makes more sense. So he asks him, would you like a pen or a pencil to fill out your thing? And it took the guy 40 minutes to decide whether he wanted a pen or a pencil, because the truth is we don't realize how our emotions actually guide our rational decision making. Why is, this is cold and this is hot? Well, how we feel about cold and hot makes a determination about how we determine how much of a factor that plays. And this is the thing where I think we get messed up a lot of times when we think we're being rational, is that we don't realize how, for example, we may have a feeling about where the data comes from. If one person says it's Howard University and the other person says it's Harvard University, do we give the Harvard University more credibility because we happen to like that school more, because we happen to have heard better things about that school? Is it a female researcher versus a male researcher?
Right.
That can impact the research data we have. So even at the deepest levels of science, and I've done a lot of work over the last number of years with the Association of American Medical Colleges, and as a result, worked at Harvard Medical School, as you said, and Stanford Medical School and others. And even at that level, they find that these biases play a role in how we make our fundamental decisions. So again, we come back to the same point, which is that we've got to start putting more question marks where we have these exclamation points in our lives.
Yeah, I think the thing I don't want people to miss is that, listen, you're saying it, and we'll probably you'll say it again, but really we have to have these emotions as part of our decision-making process.
Absolutely.
It's fundamental, because in Damasio's work with Elliot, this guy couldn't make when the decisions got more personal and social, it became almost impossible for him to make a decision. I mean,
that's actually,
yeah, I mean,
because so much of our decision making. I'm Jake, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. It's just that we want to think that we're so rational, and that if we could remove all the emotion, we can make our decisions, and we can't work that way.
Right, because so much of our decision making is built on our values, our personal standards, all of which is wrapped up in emotion. Do we what we think is fair, what we think is right? All of us have made decisions that on the surface, on a rational basis, we probably would not have made, but we made them because we had compassion for people. We were in, we felt we wanted to treat somebody more fairly, and therefore we gave them a little bit of grace on something. We interpret something differently because it comes from one friend who we really trust completely versus somebody else who we don't know at all, or who we tend not to trust. You've got friends. Everybody out there's got friends who could call you today and say, "Oh my God, a flying saucer landed in my backyard," and you can be inclined to believe them because you've got complete trust in their integrity, and somebody else who could tell you something that's completely obvious and you would be suspect because the opposite. So it's all so wrapped up that we don't realize. I think that what it really comes down to is we've been spending all this time trying to make robots act more human, when in fact what we ought to be trying is to understand how humans could be less robotic in our decision making.
We're with Howard J. Ross, author of Everyday Bias. He's with us here. So one of the next things that comes right after this is the issue of memories. And I don't want to skip over memories because you say, because they're really important. And it's chapter 2, Thinking About Thinking is the name of the chapter.
Yeah.
Over the course of our lives, we collect millions of memories, which get stored in both the conscious and unconscious parts of our brain. These memories also get stitched together into a fabric that makes up our view of the world. But how real is this world? That's the question you ask.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. See, one of the challenges is that we've been given a false understanding, and it's not just because science learned new things. So it's not that people did this intentionally. And one of the things is I try to do throughout the book is to try to break up this bias equals badness paradigm that we live in, because this stuff doesn't happen most of the time because we're being bad people. It's just because we have blind spots, and we naturally have blind spots. But the way we've been taught about memory is that we remember things as if they happen. They get stored in our memory, and then we retrieve them at times. So let's say, I'm in 4th grade and I'm riding on a bus, and Johnny sitting next to me says something that makes me upset, and that leads to something happening, and I remember that like a story. But what we now know is that that's not the way the brain stores memories. So what the brain does is breaks memories apart and stores different parts of them in different parts of our brain. So our visual memories might be stored in one part of the brain, the auditory aspect in another part of the brain, the nonlinear in another part, the more linear in another part. And then when we retrieve them, we pull them together, but we rarely pull them together perfectly. And so that story that I just told you might not have been in 4th grade. It might have been actually in the 3rd grade. It might not have been Johnny sitting next to me. It might have been Sally. And Sally might not have, in fact, said the thing I can remember she said. She might have said something different, but it reminds me of that. So and it's so funny how these memories get triggered too. What
Right.
particularly stimulates them? So I use a neti pot every morning to clean my sinuses out, because some Ayurvedic doctor who I met once told me about do this, and particularly with COVID, it's a good idea to do it. So, and whenever I do the neti pot, I get almost every single morning this memory gets triggered, because one time when I did a talk about this book at Google, my son hadn't ever seen me speak. One of my sons, he happened to live there, so he came with me to be in the audience and let me speak. I was using the neti pot in the hotel that morning, and my son hadn't seen it before, so he asked me about it, and that was in Mountain View. And I have a friend who I met who was in Mountain View, California, and so when I'm doing my neti pot now, I think of my son and this other guy almost every single morning. Now, it makes no sense that I would do that, right? But it just happens because those memories have to be attached to each other. And so this is really important when we look at how we shape memories relative to people, for example, or kinds of people, because where racial bias is concerned, for example, we pick selective memories of the positive or negative things we've heard about particular racial groups, and we form memories and stories around them. Where gender bias is concerned, we choose the gender stories about people who we have a particular attachment to, or for whom somebody happened, and we could dismiss all kinds of other women, in my case, who I've dealt with. And so it's really important for us to recognize this, that it is a tapestry that gets woven, but it's not nearly as accurate as we think that it is.
We're talking to Howard J. Ross, author of Everyday Bias. I think what happens is so frequently is, I think it's bias comes in so many different forms. We, of course, race, and we could talk gender, but we could be so biased on anything in reality.
Oh, yeah.
I look, I look at age, I guess because I'm getting older, but I look
Tell me about it.
I look at age bias, right? But whether we use millennials as like it's a dirty word. Right. And then,
Yeah.
if you're, if you're an upstart company, you're not looking at anybody over 35 or 40, and that may sound biased. I'm making it purposely that way. But the point being is that we can be literally biased. I could be biased about the color of your book. I can go, I don't know why. For crying out loud, why did Howard choose yellow? Really? Seriously? Yellow? Yellow's awful. I could, because I don't like yellow. I happen to like,
Right.
I do happen to like the cover though. I do. I'm a little biased towards yellow, so
I can't claim that. I have to say the publisher works on the cover and they give it to me. But there is a lot of research. There are marketing companies that have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into research about how people respond to certain colors and how they make
Yeah.
them feel. Look, one of the studies I think I talk about in a book, John Barge is a researcher at Yale University who researches primings, these priming techniques, like what triggers particular reactions. And Barge found that that when people hold cold drinks in their hands versus warm drinks, they tend to be tougher on interviewees than when they're holding warm drinks. There's another study that was done about there's a color that's called the specific name of the color is Baker Miller pink. It's sometimes called drunk tank pink because it's this color. It's like the kind of Pepto-Bismol pink for watchers who are trying to kind of get a sense of it. And it turns out that this color pink, when people have it around them in an environment, has a calming influence on the brain. So they actually do paint some jail cells now in this color, and they found that if that people are in this environment, they tend to calm down. In fact, some football coaches they painted the opposing locker room this color in hopes it would down the opposing players before they came onto the field. So, this is stuff that defies any logic, that a
Right.
color on the wall would change how football players play or whether or not prisoners get into fights. But nonetheless, it's been found in really very rigorous scientific
Yeah.
research to play out.
It's so true. Can we pick on Maslow for a second? I really want to.
Sure.
Because I really
Sure,
want
of course.
I really want to pick on him, and you do. And I am so proud of you. I am so proud of you. That's my bias for picking on Maslow because a lot of people, if people who are listening out there, whether live or podcast or on radio, we all know the Maslow's pyramid, the hierarchy of needs, right? And his theory of motivation, which, by the way, we have constantly in psychological research have said, that's really not true. That really doesn't work that way. It's not. And Howard, it demonstrates a flaw because, well, I'm going to let you tell him. His big
Sure.
because the primary need, right, is that it's our physical needs are the primary needs, and
That's right.
But Harry Harlow, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, actually, Abraham Maslow created his model in 1943, and for those who don't know, his basically model of needs is considered to be a foundational model in modern psychology, and it's really important work because it does have us look at how human need impacts people. But Maslow created a hierarchical structure for these needs, and as you're saying, Jay, it starts at the lowest level with our physiological needs, food, sleep, that sort of a thing. Then above that, safety. Then above that, belonging, and above that, self-esteem, and finally, what he called self-actualization, which is when we fully realize ourselves as human beings. And for the most part, that has gone unchallenged for most of 70 years in any major way. But we now realize, and some of it is by studying functional magnetic resonating imagery, you can see which parts of the brain trigger in certain ways. We now realize that Maslow was wrong, that belonging is actually our key human need. And it makes sense if you think about
Absolutely.
it. What's the most vulnerable time of a human being's existence? Infancy, right? And if you don't belong to somebody as an infant, you die. And so for the first, and because human beings are more dependent on others to survive in our first couple of years than virtually any other animal on the planet, the key message that we get in the early stages of our life is, I exist because you exist, whether you're mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, or whatever. And so we've been wrong. And when we look at things like, a suicide bombing, whether it was, the Japanese in World War II or Palestinians today or other outbreaks. Sure. I mean, it obviously completely refutes Maslow's notion because in there you see the need to belong, the needs of my larger group are more important than my physical needs. Right. Now, as a footnote to this, Jay, since I wrote the book and in talking about this, I've spoken a lot as we've talked about already. And I was at a major university speaking about this, and this guy comes up to me afterwards, and he says he was actually a direct disciple of Maslow's. He was a student of Maslow. Maslow died very young, by the way, he died in his 50s of a heart attack. And he told me that at the time that he was working with Maslow, which was toward the end of his life, Maslow was furious that everybody put it in this pyramid structure because that wasn't his original structure. That he never apparently saw it as hardened a hierarchical structure as it was later drawn up. Now, I don't know whether that's true or whether the guy loved Maslow and he was trying to protect him or not, but I just don't know. But if we look at these needs, we can see, and other people like Gerhard Hofstede, for example, Gert Hofstadter, the great Dutch organizational sociologist, has said that Maslow's hierarchy also applies more in individualistic cultures versus in collectivist
Absolutely.
cultures. So if you go to places like Asia, where the cultures are mostly collectivist, the group needs are by far more important than individual needs. So it's so important that we begin to, like I've said numerous times, that we question some of these models that have been so foundational to us, because this need to belong, to fit in, is undoubtedly primary for most of us. In fact, we know that being excluded from a group triggers activity in the dorsal posterior insula of the brain, which is the same part of the brain associated with physical pain.
I just as an anecdotal practical level of this piece, I say this regularly. I've said this to the college students when I've taught psychology. If that pyramid, and whether it was true or not that it was a pyramid, if that was true, understand that you would not have a desire to text message while you drive if your safety was so important.
Exactly.
But because you want to belong, want to be part of the conversation, you will text and drive at the peril of your safety, physical safety.
That's right. Look, I can give you even a more basic need. How many people who are listening to us have been in a meeting at work? You had to go to the bathroom and you sat there squirming rather than be the first one to stand up and leave the meeting and go to the bathroom, right? I mean, there's no more basic physical need than that, right? And yet we could all relate to that story. You didn't want to get out. You didn't want to be the one who stood up, right?
Yes.
And that's a paramount example of what you're talking about. The need to fit in the group and not be seen as an outsider by the group covers even that basic physical need of elimination. So we know that this is true as human beings.
That's awesome. His name is Howard J. Ross. The book is entitled Everyday Bias, and you are listening to him here on A New Direction. Hey, everybody, I talk about epic physical therapy a lot. It's because they're my physical therapists, and they have been for years, and it's because they do a great job. I've had several surgeries from, tearing all the rotator cuffs off my shoulders, probably TMI, right, to, several knee surgeries, right? They've put me back together. Literally. I feel like they have. Here's why, because it's one of the most advanced, top of the line facilities. They've got the best equipment, like the Alter-G anti-gravity treadmill, which is awesome. The Normatec compression sleeves, which makes me feel like my joints are young again. And then the Game Ready, which is this ice water compression thing that just takes the swelling out of your limbs. It's absolutely phenomenal. Look, they are trained and certified in the most cutting edge treatments available. Here's just a few. Blood flow restriction therapy, dry needling. If you've never had that done, it's fantastic. And then cupping. If you've ever seen the circles on the back of a swimmer's back, where they're manipulating the muscle through the skin, it's great and it works. So when you're ready for your epic relief, when you're ready for your epic recovery, when you want those epic results, do not look any further. Start with Epic Physical Therapy. That's epicpt.com. That's EPICPT.com. And Linda Kraft and Team Realtors. You know what? Here's the thing about them. They've been around for 35 years, and they're in the Research Triangle Park, but they help people all over the world. They have built relationships with other real estate professionals all over the world. They have helped people for 35 plus years in helping them sell their home and buy their home. And yes, they understand that, the home is probably the largest purchase that you will ever make, personally, right? And that's probably true. But you know what the bigger issue is that home will be the place where you had your greatest memories. End of the day. Right? You can never remember the price that your grandmother or grandfather paid for their house, but man, you remember everything that you did there, don't you? I do. I never knew. I don't know what my grandmother, grandfather paid for their house, but I do sure remember those memories. That's what Linda understood, is that home, those memories are important to you. And those memories are the things that make a life over the course of time. I mean, we've been talking about that right here on the show, that our memories are woven together and we create life, and sometimes we do get a little biased and we think about the good times and only the good times. But the truth is, you know what? We do remember those memories, and they're precious to us. So when you're ready to sell or buy your home, why not go with the memory maker? Why not go with the person that her clients even say her customer service is legendary? Why not go with Linda Kraft and team? You can learn more by going to lindakraft.com. That's LINDACRAFT.com. And we're back here on A New Direction with Howard J. Ross and Everyday Bias. And we've been talking about some bias, of course, and why we have them. But we're going to jump all the way over to chapter 7. It's called Shifting to Neutral, How We Can Learn to Disengage from Bias. And you start off with a question, Howard. The question we have to ask is, actually, you have several questions. So I'm going to ask them both, okay? I'm going to, because you have the question we have to ask, and then we have the question we must ask. So the question we have to ask is, can we trust our own perceptions? And then the question we must ask, is there really anything we can do about our unconscious biases? So I'm going to let you tackle those one at a time and walk us through this.
Okay, great. I just have to say, Jay, listening to your last, advertisement there for Linda Graff, that it reminded me of wonderful quote from Dr. Maya Angelou, who said that you'll never remember what people say, you'll never remember what you do, but you'll always remember how they made you feel. And there's some foundational truth to that. We
Absolutely.
do store memories based on how things make us feel, and all of us remember certain times in our lives. Like I can remember, like yesterday, hearing the news that President Kennedy was shot in 1963. So that's 57 years ago. I was a kid, I was only 12 years old at the time. And I can remember where I was sitting and how it happened. And then there are things that happened 3 days ago that I can't remember. So because that had such a huge
Right.
emotional impact.
Right.
So it's true. So the first question is, are we willing to question ourselves? I mean, this is fundamentally, what we've been talking about in various different ways the whole time today, Jay, and that is that we are driven towards a false sense of certainty. Some of us more than others, people with extreme narcissism, for example, can't even imagine that they're wrong. Sometimes people who are the most educated, this is one of the challenges I found, for example, in working in university environments or with people who are incredibly smart. Sometimes we think that because we're smart, we can actually think our way through this process. But in actuality, what the research shows, some research at James Madison University pops to mind, is that sometimes the smartest people have the most solid blind spots because we stop questioning ourselves. If we're used to being the smartest bulb in the box, if we're used to being the smartest person in the room, we don't even challenge ourselves. And this can be a challenge whether you're talking about a physician who doesn't consider other ways of doing services, whether you're talking about a lawyer who just knows only one way to practice, or a politician, or anybody. I mean, any of us in our lives, when we get arrogant, our thinking function stops. And what we found is that the people who are most likely to be able to see it are people who are smart and willing to inquire, but also leave a little bit of question mark as to whether or not they're sure that they're right all the time. And that's where it starts. So then let's assume we're in a good headspace about this. We really do want to know. Well, there are a number of things that we found that really have impact, that we can actually begin to bring some of the unconscious to the surface. And that's where it's really important. Carl Jung said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate, because we don't realize the role we're playing in all of this. So the first thing is the very fundamental thing that we're doing here, which is to acknowledge that we do have bias, that everybody has it. It doesn't make us a bad person. Doesn't make anything wrong, mean there's anything wrong with us. It just means we're human. And even the Dalai Lama has bias. I mean, it's the nature of mind and how mind works. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has the same negative biases to people, nor does it mean that everybody has biases towards the same kind of people. We might each have the biases towards different kinds of people or different circumstances, but we all have it. And so when we approach, let's say in a business environment, we approach a circumstance, sometimes even when people are highly interested in this, they might start the conversation by saying, gee, do we have any biases in these circumstances? Where in fact, the more appropriate question might be to ask, what are our biases in this circumstance? Because they are there. And the other thing is that some of them are legitimate. Sometimes biases can be legitimate. We accept that we have these biases. It doesn't mean there aren't exceptions, but the nature of the bias may be such that there's enough chance that it's going to happen that going with that bias makes sense. Okay. So let's say we start with that premise number one. We all have bias. Okay. Then the question becomes, well, if I have bias and I'm not aware of it, either because I'm in denial, as you said, or just because I have blind spots about it, I just am not seeing it. What do? Well, that maybe the most important of all the steps then is to say, I'm going to consciously start watching myself. The metaphor, as you know, Jay, in the book I use is turning a flashlight on myself. It's just a metaphor my friend Michael Schieser created for doing this. It's like, am I watching myself in action? Am I spending part of myself time watching myself in action? Now we know that virtually any mental health practice that anybody, whether it's therapy or programs, almost always has some component of this, becoming more aware of self, watching self. Develops our prefrontal cortex more. One of the things we know it does is it pulls us out of our more reactive functions when we start. So I start to notice, are there certain people who I tend to feel more comfortable with than others? When I look at the friends in my life, do they represent different certain groups of people? Out of the top 10 people in my life are the people who are missing, kinds of people who are missing from that. Why is that so? Is it just geography? Is it just circumstance? Or am I more open to certain kinds of people than others? So we begin to ask those questions, things start to emerge. And part of this process, too, is to manage not going into guilt, because guilt, too much of the work we've done around bias is centered around guilt, and guilt actually shuts people down.
Amen.
When we feel guilty, we tend to make ourselves wrong or make the person who's making us feel guilty wrong. And then a third one, just to throw in, and then I'll take a breath for a moment, is how do we develop what I call constructive uncertainty? And that is, what I mean by it is not paralysis by analysis, not slowing down our decision making so much so that we can't even process anything anymore, but to develop some constructive uncertainty, to ask a few extra questions, have somebody else look at our process, sleep overnight before you send out that email or that text that you were going to send, to give yourself try to consciously look at things from different perspectives. This is where Gleb Sapirski's work has been so valuable, because Gleb really has identified these different ways of making decisions that we can be a little bit more thoughtful of. So once we start doing at least those three things, then we can begin to realize, wow, okay, I hadn't thought about that aspect, or gee, I guess I could look at this differently, or gee, that completely changes the way I make this decision. Right. And we know that there are countless examples of people who've done this over time and have made better decisions because of it.
Howard J. Ross is joining us. The book is Everyday Bias. One of the things, by the way, there's so much there. I think people want to think that the more educated we are, the less biased we are. Well, you completely just got rid of that, because it's really not true. I love that. I was raised in Nebraska, and so there was a University of Nebraska study that you talk about where, even the professors thought that they were better than 98% of other professors.
That's right. That's right. Like 90+% of the professors thought that they were better than average. So it's like, what's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that picture? You did talk about turning the flashlight on yourself, and I thought one of the things that you said here right after you said that, and it's so important when it comes to combating bias, is the more that we name what is going on with us, and I'm quoting you, the quieter the amygdala becomes, and we are less likely to be hijacked by the amygdala's automatic reaction. Talk about why it is so important to name what is going on with you inside of you. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, and we know this colloquially. This is why we have things like misery loves company and all these different sayings these aphorisms we have. It's because when we get something out of our head, when we talk about, let's say you have a reaction, you have a fear reaction for something, and you're really triggered by it, and it frightens you, and your amygdala is on over. In fact, we have a name for it. Daniel Goleman coined it, an amygdala hijacking. Right. The fear center of the brain takes over, the limbic system takes over. We can't think straight because the fear is going on. And then you go and somebody says, tell me what's going on. You say, well, this happened. And it's just like, and it's almost like the steam valve releases. You feel yourself calming a little bit just by being able to share it with somebody. And what we know is that now studies by watching the brain using, functional magnetic resonating imagery, we know that when we watch the brain, that the fMRI shows that the amygdala, the response in the amygdala starts to quiet down when we do this. Now again, interesting aphorism. What have we heard most of us all of our lives? If you're angry, count to 10. Which is because this reaction, this amygdala hijack reaction, actually is about a 90-second reaction. And after about 90 seconds, it will start to calm down naturally by itself. It doesn't mean you won't still be afraid, but the panic aspect of it will usually start to calm itself down. By the way, obviously there are exceptions to anything, sure. And there's some people who have panic disorder and things like this who this doesn't necessarily apply to. But what often happens is we go into panic mode, and then we panic because we're in panic mode, and then we continue to panic because we're in panic mode. And so it's almost like a trip switch that keeps tripping itself. It's like if you've ever seen one of these things where they have, all of these different mouse traps, and they all have a ping pong ball in them, and you set off one and it all sets off the other. Pretty soon they're all bouncing all over the place. What's happening in our mind. So just taking a few minutes and calming oneself. This is where mindfulness practices are really important. Things like breathing, Simply breathing can do that, because to consciously say to yourself, I want to breathe more deeply, actually requires that prefrontal cortex to kick in, which pulls you out of that limbic reaction and slows yourself down. And then you can make better decisions and more thoughtful decisions.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we understand that, when we get lazy when it comes to our bias, and we don't want to dig there. It's almost like sometimes we want to hold on to it, and listen, you are so right, because our tendency is to say, we just want to guilt these people out of bias. We will never guilt people out of bias. You make that
Correct.
so clear over and over and over again in this book, that we will never guilt someone out of their bias, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so
That's right.
we have to, we get a little lazy, and I talk about the training at the beginning of the show, but we have to become more self-aware. And then we got to label it. We got to name it, right? And then here's you say something in chapter 8 that I thought is beautiful. You say, when we are aware of our reserves are low, and we've mistakenly blamed the wrong people or group or whatever, an apology can go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
This awareness,
That's right.
This awareness gives
Mm-hmm.
us a new ability to consider our actions and modify them in more appropriate ways.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I think sadly happens with so many people. We make a mistake, and then we get so self-conscious about the mistake that we try to hide it. I mean, we smear cream cheese all over and try to make it look nice. We do something nice for that person. It's like the the spouse who does something, something, and I'm not talking about major infractions, but you do something for your for me, in my case, I'm married. I do something, let's say, that I know wasn't pleasing to my wife. And if I were, rather than say, honey, I'm really sorry, I just come home with flowers, she might throw the flowers at me, because she's not interested in getting the flowers until she gets the apology. She wants first to know that I'm taking responsibility for what I did. I'm not just covering it up by doing something nice about it. And I think that this is important. My experience has been, and I've worked with very difficult situations and very difficult places for 35 years professionally, and before that, just in terms of doing work with social justice, is that people have a remarkable capacity for forgiveness when people are honest and take responsibility for whatever they did, whatever infraction they did. That people remark. Now, I'm not saying 100% all the time, of course, but it's really quite remarkable. In fact, I find sometimes when we do that ourselves, when we take full responsibility for something and really own it with people feel better about us than had we never done the original infraction, because we've demonstrated that we have integrity as human beings, that we're willing to own our stuff. And now it's you feel much more trust being in a relationship with somebody who's willing to own their own stuff.
His name's Howard J. Ross, and the book Everyday Bias. And you know what? We've been on almost a full hour.
Oh my gosh.
It's gone so fast. I have thoroughly enjoyed this time with you. The book's great, and it's been eye-opening, and I know that people all over the world, the thousands of the people that get to listen to the show are going to change as a result of the things that you said, the book that you've written here. The show, Howard, is called A New Direction because we try to help people find a new direction in their life or their career in the business. And if you were to give people a new direction based on your work here in Everyday Bias, what would be that new direction from Howard J. Ross?
It would be, reach out to somebody who's different from you and ask them if you can have a conversation just to understand each other without changing points of view. Maybe it's somebody different racially. Maybe it's somebody, maybe it's a coworker who's of another gender. Maybe it's somebody with a different political orientation. Reach out and say, hey, look, I know we have differences. What I'd love to do is just try to understand those differences and just listen to each other. And what you'll begin to find is you realize that underneath these things that we separate ourselves from is a common humanity. We're all trying to, feel better about ourselves every day. We're trying to, achieve happiness and avoid pain. We want our kids to grow up safe. It's just, I think I share in there, I read the transcripts of the Camp David Accords when Jimmy Carter brought together Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. And they struggled as they tried to deal with these issues that the Israelis and Egyptians had dealt with for all these years. And then he asked something of both of them. He said, well, what's the world you would like for your grandchildren? And that was the key. That was what broke it open, because when they both started sharing what they wanted for their grandchildren, they realized that they had a common vision for the future. And that's what we all have. And so if we get underneath all that other BS and really get down to our humanity, we have an opportunity to find each other.
His name's Howard J. Ross, and he has been great, has he not? Folks, this is the show. As I say
What
to
a
you,
pleasure, Jay.
oh,
What a pleasure, really. I've so enjoyed it.
well, thank you, folks. See, this is what the show's about, right? Right. It's why we call it New Direction. You know what I tell you every week? Be inspired, because when you're inspired, that means you'll inspire other people, and in turn, when they're inspired, they'll inspire others, and then you know what? That makes this world a really great place. I want to be back next week with another great show, another great guest, another great book, and as I say to you every week, and you know what that is, right? Ciao, everybody.
To go a different way, yeah. The time has come for a new direction. Yeah, yeah. New direction. Yeah, yeah. When you lost your confidence and the answers don't make sense, you got to keep your hope alive. Got to know you can survive. This is your time to fly. A new direction, a brand new day. A new direction, things are gonna change. You can find the strength to go a different way, yeah. The time has come. Your dreams will take you places you have never been before. Find your passion, find your strength. Don't worry anymore. A new direction.